The recent announcement of a new U.S.-China trade agreement has sparked excitement and debate across economic and political circles. At first glance, it appears to be a major breakthrough between two of the world's largest economies, potentially easing years of trade tensions that have affected global markets and everyday consumers alike. However, a closer look reveals a more nuanced reality. While the U.S. government presents the agreement as a significant deal, China describes it instead as a consultation mechanism, essentially an agreement to keep talking rather than a binding contract with concrete commitments. This distinction matters because it highlights the ongoing uncertainty surrounding the future of U.S.-China trade relations. In this article, we'll unpack what this new deal really means, explore the potential impacts on businesses and consumers, and explain why cautious optimism might be the best way to approach this latest development. The announcement: what actually happened. On May 11th, after 2 days of meetings in Geneva, the White House announced that it had reached what it called a China trade deal. This statement came from top officials, including U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. They described the outcome as a substantial step forward, reflecting a mutual desire to cooperate and reduce tensions. Sounds encouraging, right? But here's where things get interesting. While the U.S. side called it a deal, China's response was very different. Chinese Vice Premier Le Feng didn't mention a finalized agreement. Instead, he spoke about establishing a consultation mechanism, essentially an agreement to keep talking. This consultation mechanism isn't legally binding. It includes no tariff rollbacks and no immediate changes in how businesses operate. So, what is it? Think of it like two people who had a big argument agreeing to meet regularly to talk things through. It's an open line of communication without promises, which creates a disconnect between the two sides' messages. What is a consultation mechanism? A consultation mechanism is essentially a process or forum for ongoing discussions without committing to specific outcomes. It means both sides agree to meet regularly to discuss trade issues, try to resolve disputes, and build understanding over time. This is not a contract, and it doesn't guarantee results. It's more like keeping the door open to negotiations rather than closing it entirely. So while the U.S. is framing this as a win, proof that their tough stance is working, China is signaling caution, avoiding any binding commitments. Past attempts at U.S.-China trade dialogue. This isn't the first time the U.S. and China have agreed to more talks. Over the years, there have been several initiatives like the Strategic Economic Dialogue and the Comprehensive Economic Dialogue, all designed to improve relations and resolve disputes. Most of these efforts fizzled out once tensions escalated again. So the big question is this time different? That depends on what happens next. Right now, there are no published terms, no timetable for tariff reductions, and no clear agreements on core issues like intellectual property rights or state subsidies, the very issues that sparked the trade war. The context. What led to this point? Remember, back in the Trump administration, massive tariffs were imposed, up to 145% on some Chinese imports. These tariffs froze nearly $600 billion in trade between the U.S. and China. China retaliated with its own tariffs, up to 125%, effectively stalling trade between the two largest economies. This trade war impacted everything from smartphone prices to auto parts costs. For American farmers and exporters, it was especially painful. Prices rose, some businesses cut jobs, and global supply chains were forced to adapt quickly. For President Trump, this announcement comes at a politically useful time, especially after recently signing a smaller trade deal with the UK to ease tariffs on British cars. Together, These moves paint a picture of a White House making progress on tough trade negotiations. What's actually changed? Despite the optimistic language, nothing concrete has changed yet. There has been no rollback of tariffs, no new access granted for U.S. companies in Chinese markets, and no changes to intellectual property protections, one of the biggest sticking points. This reality has trade experts urging caution. Many see this announcement as symbolic, great for headlines and political messaging, but not yet a tangible win for workers, consumers, or business owners. Why does China's language matter? When one side calls an outcome a deal and the other calls it a dialogue mechanism, it signals they might not agree on what was agreed upon. Anyone who's negotiated before knows how confusing this can be. You might think you settled something while the other party thinks you just agreed to keep talking. Is this meaningless? Not necessarily. Restarting dialogue can be better than radio silence. When the US and China aren't talking, tensions tend to rise, creating uncertainty, something businesses hate. For example, a US electronics company relying on Chinese parts might hesitate to invest or hire if it fears tariffs could spike again. They might pass higher costs to consumers or delay expansion. So even a slight hint of stability can bring relief. Potential for real progress. If this consultation process leads to concrete results, like phased tariff rollbacks or cooperation on tech regulations, this announcement could become much more meaningful over time. But markets and manufacturers won't shift strategies until they see actual terms and clarity. Right now, this deal functions mostly as a political signal rather than an economic shift. Still, in global trade, even having the door cracked open is better than it being slammed shut. What does this mean for businesses? If you run a business that depends on international trade, you might feel torn by this news. On one hand, talks restarting is hopeful. On the other, no real change yet means uncertainty remains. Will you invest in new supply chains, hire more staff, or wait for clearer signals? This ambiguity complicates decision-making for many business leaders. Why trade policy matters to everyone. Trade policy often feels like something only big corporations or politicians worry about. But the truth is, it affects all of us. When tariffs rise, prices on everyday goods tend to go up. When talks break down, jobs can be at risk as companies cut back or delay expansion. Wages and economic growth can stagnate, impacting families across the country. That's why trade deals and negotiations matter, even if they seem far removed from daily life. Recap what we know so far. The U.S. announced a trade deal with China on May 11th, but China describes it as a consultation mechanism, a commitment to keep talking. No tariff rollbacks, no clear agreements on key issues, and no binding commitments have been made public yet. This move is more symbolic and political than economic for now. Restarting dialogue is positive but far from a final resolution. Businesses and markets are watching closely but remain cautious. Looking ahead, what's next? The big question remains. Will these talks lead to real progress, or will tensions flare up again? Only time will tell. If both sides keep meeting and eventually agree on phased tariff reductions and clearer rules, this could be the start of a new chapter in U.S.-China trade relations. But if discussions stall or break down, the trade war could resume, bringing more uncertainty and economic pain. Final thoughts. So, is this new U.S.-China trade deal a turning point or just a pause in a long struggle? It's too soon to say. For now, it's mostly a political win and a promise to keep communication lines open. If you're running a business dependent on trade, or just watching how these moves affect prices and jobs, it's important to stay informed and be ready to adapt. Let me know in the comments. How do you feel about this news? Are you hopeful or skeptical? Would you feel reassured or confused if you ran a business relying on international trade?